Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast, where I give you practical Stoic advice for modern times. If you'd like to see more information about the podcast, or if you'd like to see more of my free resources, you can go to my website. It's risetothegoodlife.com. If you have been getting a lot of value out of this podcast, then please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this, and leave a positive review. But for now, enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. This episode is somewhat of a part 2 following on from episode number 31, titled How to Deal with Anger. If you haven't listened to that episode, then I would highly recommend that you go back and check it out before listening to this episode. So the reason why I'm building on the topic of anger is because I recently had a listener message me on Facebook with a question about episode 31. And as is usually the case with any kind of teacher-student scenario, if one person has a question, then it's likely that many people have that same question. So I thought that I would save you all some confusion and answer the question on the podcast as well. So what was the question? Well, basically this person understood the ideas that I was sharing in that episode. However, he wondered if there was ever a scenario where anger was necessary. And the example that he gave was that he was recently out with his wife, and somebody called his wife an extremely derogatory term, and he was absolutely furious and went ballistic. So he asked me how the Stoics would have handled this situation, and also if there ever is a case where this kind of anger would be acceptable. You know, I really was grateful to him for reaching out to me because I think this is a really important question that we should be thinking about right now before the circumstances arise where we feel like we need to express that anger or rage. And on top of that, I'm sure that many of you have had this same question, so I'd like to give you all an extended version of the response that I gave to him. I'd like to first say that much of my answer is based on opinion and interpretation of Stoic literature and ideas, but I hope that I'll be able to give you a lot to think about so that you can actually make up your own mind about this question. So my first response to his question was basically to say that if I was in his situation and somebody had just called my wife a derogatory name, I would most likely have burst into a rage as well. However, it is very important to always try to distinguish between what we do and what we should do, because there is a very big difference between an impulse reaction and the correct reaction. So in this scenario, was there a good enough reason to become infuriated? I would suggest that the answer is no. And on that same line of questioning, would the Stoics ever condone being extremely angry? Again, I don't think that they would. So I'll explain my answers by giving a little scenario, and I'll just list the reasons why I would believe that the Stoics would advise us to not get angry in this situation. And the scenario that I'll give will be the case of somebody trying to intimidate you or someone who you know. We've all been young before, and I'm sure that there are many youth who are listening to this show who are currently experiencing bullying or some type of intimidation, and so I'm sure that we can all agree that it's often hard to be rational or calm in a situation like that. But what would the Stoics tell us to do? As I've said, I believe that they would advise us that anger and reciprocated aggression is the wrong answer, and here's why. First, the Stoics teach that we should always seek to find harmony with our fellow man, even with the most terrible people. For any of you who have read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, you'll be familiar with this quote, where he says, quote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood and birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness. Nor can I feel angry at my relative, or hate him. We were born to work together like feet, like hands and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on him, these are unnatural." End quote. So what we can learn from this is not only that we should expect horrible people to be in the world, which in itself will allow you to not be so harmed by these people, but we should also seek to live in harmony with these people. It's kind of like turning the other cheek. We should choose harmony over hostility every single time. Why? Because everyone on earth is your brother or sister. Everyone is connected to you. And if you try to hurt them, then you're also hurting yourself. The second reason why a Stoic should never find an excuse for anger is because as Stoics, we must learn what we can control and what we cannot. And anger is something that we can control, while other people's actions are only partly in our control. If you truly want to change the nasty person who is intimidating you, then anger is not the best option. This will most likely inflame the situation, and you will do more damage to yourself than you will to them. See, Stoics put a really high emphasis on inner strength and inner courage. This means controlling your impulses and focusing on how you can actually change the situation, as opposed to giving in to your lower self. Try reasoning with the person who is treating you poorly. Try to resolve the situation in a loving and calm manner. If that doesn't work, then at least you can walk away knowing that you have been untouched by their poor choices, and they are now the ones who are being most negatively affected, because their pride is keeping them from making positive changes. Next, the Stoics teach that everything is opinion. Epictetus said that, quote, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." End quote. Before you become angry at someone who is being a bully or seeking to harm you, try to reconstruct your view of that person. Maybe they're hurting more than you. Maybe that person has a terrible home life, and they're trying to hurt other people because they believe that will make them feel better. Maybe, just maybe, they were raised with different values than yours, and they do not respect people like you do. This does not excuse their actions, but when you try to see a different paradigm, then you are able to invite empathy and love into your reaction. You can make the choice to help this person instead of becoming that person. Finally, the Stoics teach that we do not have the power to choose what happens, but we do have the power to choose how we react to what happens. Marcus Aurelius said, quote, "You may explode in rage, but men will still go on doing what they have always done." End quote. This is so true. You can choose to just give in to your most basic reactions and go crazy, but that will most likely not change a single thing. Focus on you. Focus on trying to resolve the situation in the most mutually beneficial way. If you get angry, then you'll only hurt yourself, because you'll be lowering yourself to that person's level. You'll be giving in to your most basic instincts, and your anger will only hinder your progress towards a more virtuous life, which is the ultimate goal. As Epictetus has said in a few of his writings, our aim in life should be inner tranquility and outer effectiveness, and by choosing to get angry, we immediately ruin our chances of achieving either of those goals in the moment. So the next time you feel like anger is the only option, consider that as a Stoic, you must always try to take the higher ground, or to be the bigger person, because that is the way to true virtue. Take Epictetus as an example. Here is a man who spent much of his life as a slave or in banishment, and he is one of the Stoics who is teaching us that we should never feel anger at another person or at a situation. In my opinion, there is no such thing as justified anger. There are only poorly considered responses. True Stoics choose love and kindness over anger every single time. You have the power, and by choosing a positive response to negative situations, we show the world that we are not slaves to emotion, but rather we are the masters of emotion. We won't always achieve this, however, we must always try. Hi there, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I'm so grateful that you guys are putting in the time to listen to these episodes, And if you're the kind of person who's out there reading these books and reading and learning from Stoicism, and you're applying these principles into your life, then you're absolutely my kind of person. So thank you so much, and just keep on being you, because it's awesome what you're doing. I also wanted to say that, answering this listener's question in this podcast really made me think that I'd really love for this podcast to be more of a conversation between me and you guys than just for me to be talking. So if you have any questions, please by all means hit me up on Facebook, or you can go to my website and send me an email there. So my website is risetothegoodlife.com, and you can go to my contact page, or just go to my Facebook page, which is Practical Stoic Quotes. And if you have any questions, then I'll do my absolute best to answer them every time. And look, if I think that it's something that the majority of the listeners of this podcast could value from hearing, then I'll turn it into a podcast. So once again, thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time, but until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I hope that you've gotten a lot of value out of it, and I hope that it helps you to live a better life. If you have been enjoying this podcast, then don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this, and leave a positive review so that other people can have the chance to listen to this great work. Don't forget that you can see more free resources on my website at risetothegoodlife.com, or on Facebook at Practical Stoic Quotes.